Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched episodes 4 to 6 of Ironheart. Let's talk about it. So yes, we finally got the final 3 episodes of the Ironheart series. I say finally, but it's only been a week since the series premiered, and I did in fact drop my review of the first 3 episodes of the show last week, so you can go ahead and check that out on my channel if you haven't already. But in that review, I dove into the kind of setup of this story and the reintroduction of Riri Williams, aka Ironheart, and my thoughts on the series leading up to that bombastic episode 3 cliffhanger. So if you want some more background on all of that good stuff, then you can go ahead and check out that video. For today's video, we're going to be focusing on the last 3 episodes of the show, but I'm also going to be sharing my overall thoughts on the positives and negatives of the series creatively. So if that sounds fun to you guys, then stay tuned, of course. And as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And if you enjoyed my reviews, then please be sure to give this video a thumbs up to let me and YouTube know, because the algorithm has been kicking my ass lately, so that love would be much appreciated. But now guys, without further ado, first off, let's dive into my overall thoughts on the Ironheart show. Starting off with the good here, I think overall this series was a resounding success creatively. This is definitely one of the better entries into the phases 4 and 5 of the MCU. We have the reintroduction of an incredibly compelling, amazing character in Riri Williams, who is brilliantly portrayed by Dominique Thorne. In the past, I've spoken quite a bit about how some of these new young female characters that have entered the MCU have felt a little bit homogenous and samey in terms of their personality. They're like these kind of go-getter, young, strong, confident female characters who are really lovable, and I really love to see them in the MCU, but it is a risk when you're dealing with so many female characters that share the same personality, because if the end game for this whole situation is in fact to bring them into a young Avengers team, then we're going to be dealing with a team that doesn't have a very interesting dynamic, because everyone is the same. If everyone's the same, then who's going to butt heads with who? How are we going to create some sort of conflict in the team dynamics if everyone is pretty monotone? But in Riri, we have an example of a young female character who is distinctively different. Yes, partially because she is a black female character, and so they've definitely incorporated that into her persona, into her environment and background and story, which I love. But also just personality wise, there's the way that Dominique Thorne plays her, which is distinctly different to a Kamala Khan or a Kate Bishop or even a Yelena. Now, another key difference in the character is where she falls on the moral scale. Ooh! Because yes, one of the recurring themes that I saw in the comment section to my review of episodes 1 to 3, which by the way, that comment section was a mess. It was an absolute disaster. And even though I'm not surprised because of the content that we're dealing with, I am still really disappointed in seeing that kind of reception around this show. And it really just proved my point. Like the points that I made in my video were just proven time and time again in the comment section. But I digress. One of the things that the negative commenters kept saying was that Riri was a shameful representation of a black female protagonist because she was a criminal, because she had joined this gang, okay, that were doing criminal, horrible things like robberies, hurting people, and, you know, espionage, all sorts of terrible crimes in order to get money, okay, in order to get their money up. People thought that this was extremely stereotypical and a dangerous message to send out about a black female superhero. People kept saying that it was an extremely shameful element to this character, and that she had brought shame to the Iron Man name, I guess, because Tony Stark wasn't a criminal. Tony Stark wasn't a criminal. How dare she besmirch his name like that? And it's just an embarrassment to have a character who joins a gang and becomes a criminal and hurts people and even leaves someone for death. Like, this is not the kind of hero that we want to see enter the MCU. And the fact that she's a black girl just makes it 10 times worse. This was the narrative that I kept seeing in my comment section, to which I would say, what on earth are you talking about actually? What on earth are you talking about? You guys sound wild. You guys sound so crazy and so hypocritical, because guys, the MCU is flooded with, overflowing with protagonists who have dark pasts. That's literally the MCU's whole bag. That's literally their entire bag, actually. For instance, one of the MCU's most beloved characters is Bucky Barnes. Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier. The man who was an assassin for decades under Hydra control. Literally decades. You can't even fathom the number of people that he killed. And you might be like, oh, but Bucky was under Hydra control, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. But like, he's not exactly walking through a field of roses right now. And then you have the character of Yelena and really everyone on the Thunderbolts team. That was literally one of the main messages of that film. It's the fact that they all have dark pasts. They all have red on their ledger. Shout out to Natasha Romanoff. But yet they decided to step up and do the right thing and be the heroes, and that conscious decision is what made them heroes at the end. It wasn't their past, but rather what they chose to do in the present and how they decided to change their futures and take back that narrative. That's literally one of the messages of Thunderbolts. So for you guys to turn around and be like, oh, well, Riri is a criminal. She's a criminal, and therefore this makes the series stupid, and she's a shameful character. She's a blight on the MCU. People were actually listing characters like Scott Lang, who was literally a thief. Scott Lang would have had Riri on her team if it wasn't for Michael Pena being there instead. What are you talking about? What are you literally talking about? The examples that you're coming up with just make you sound crazier and crazier, because it just highlights your hypocrisy. Every single one of these characters have red on their ledger. That's literally the MCU's whole bag. Whole bag. The Hulk, you want to talk about the Hulk, you want to talk about Hawkeye, you want to talk about the whole of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Point me to one MCU character that hasn't done anything wrong in their entire lives. Point me to them. Point me to them. That's literally their whole bag. Why? Because having characters who have done bad things, who have conflicting paths, who have red on their ledger, makes them more compelling characters. Guys, come on, it's story writing 101. If you want a compelling protagonist, you're gonna need to give them a bit of conflict. You're gonna need to give them a bit of gray area to make them more interesting, because otherwise you end up with a Superman. And for the longest time, people's main critique of Superman was that he was just too bland, that he was just too bread and butter, like he had no spice to him. Hence why a lot of people were drawn to the MCU, because you're dealing with some flawed heroes instead of an average Superman. And even sticking just to DC, that's why Batman has always been considered more popular. It's because he does have those flawed characteristics in him. He himself is a criminal. He is walking a very fine line between being a hero and being the Joker. That's literally one of the contentious points in the Batman story. So this hypocrisy surrounding the character of Riri has never convinced me. This is propaganda that I will never fall for. This is propaganda I will never fall for. And believe me, you might think that you would have preferred a black female character who was just pitch perfect, had never done anything wrong, was just flawless. But once you see that play out, you'll see how stupid that is, because then there's no story, then there's no conflict, there's no internal struggle, and that makes for a very boring, bland, and forgettable character. And not to mention, if Marvel had given you a pitch perfect black female character, you would have complained about that anyway. You would have said she was a Mary Sue. You would have said that she never had to overcome anything. Like, no, please. I have seen all kind of facets of this argument from all different fronts, and I'm here to tell you that it's all BS, because the root of the issue has nothing to do with the storytelling around the character. It has nothing to do with her being a criminal, being bad representation, blah, blah, blah. It has everything to do with her being a black girl. and people having unfair expectations for this character as a result of that. That's literally all that it is. The hypocrisy, bending over backwards, trying to think of some kind of reason for why she's a poorly written, uninspired character is literally because of her racial and gender identity. But going back to the positives, I choose to see the fact that Riri is flawed and does make some challenging, questionable decisions as a positive for this series and for the character, because it makes her more compelling and it gives the story a little bit more meat on its bones for us to sink our teeth into. And there was also plenty of positives in the story overall. I particularly liked the idea of introducing the intermingling between magic and science in the MCU through the character of Riri Williams. What a fascinating concept, the idea that she would boost up her technological achievements with the use of magic. And I would love to see that be explored in other corners of the MCU as well, because I think that is a really interesting idea that they've tapped into. I also think the series overall was very well produced. It was a great introduction into the Chicago corner of the MCU, because oftentimes we see New York and other cities, even London, be highlighted more. And so seeing Chicago through an MCU lens was great. But in particular, we of course have a lot of CGI be used here to manifest Riri's suit and bring it to life. And I thought the CGI on here was very, very strong, particularly with the suit. But other than that, they used the special effects very sparingly. You can tell where the budget went and didn't go. And finally, I had a blast with a lot of the characters in this series as well. Huge fan of Riri. I think she's one of my favorite new characters that they've introduced post Endgame for sure. And Dominique Thorne absolutely killed it in this role. Again, there's a lot of complexity and layers to this character. She does make some dumb decisions. We'll talk about it. dumb decisions throughout the show. But that's what it means to have a multifaceted character. They're not always going to do the right thing. They are going to make some mistakes and hopefully learn along the way. And that just makes a far more interesting journey to take the audience on, instead of having this fully fleshed out character that's already perfect and has nowhere to go with their arc. And people do understand this. Like when it comes to any other character, they're able to realize this. But of course, when the character's black and when she's a black woman, all of that logic goes right out the window and they start typing some crazy stuff about, oh, but Riri's evil and a criminal, doesn't deserve to be a Marvel hero, blah, 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 blah. Tony Stark would be ashamed. Tony Stark? You mean the man who was a warmonger? The man who headed up a weapons manufacturing company but was too busy being drunk and sleeping with journalists to realize that his company was selling weapons to both sides of a war? That man? That Tony Stark? Really? And some other standouts here included Natalie, who was portrayed by Lyric Ross. She's definitely my second favorite character of this show. Loved Natalie. Loved her down. And she and Riri had an incredible friendship together, an amazing chemistry on screen. And I would also say that Anthony Ramos did a decent job as Parker. He was limited by the story, which we'll talk about, but in terms of his performance, I think he did a pretty good job of conveying, just how far the character had fallen after being wrapped up, in that red cape. Another favorite character of mine was Joe, aka Zeke, portrayed by Alden Ehrenreich. He was fantastic. He was phenomenal, and I would have loved to have seen more of him. In fact, I would have loved to have seen more of everything and everyone, and that's one of my main complaints about this series. Then we move on to the critiques here, and the first one up is that it was way too short. I'm sorry, Kevin Feige, what the hell? This series was way too short. It needed more than just 6 episodes to really do the story justice. And so particularly in the second half, you could feel how much they were rushing through all of these story beats to get it done in just the 6 episodes. And it's such a shame because they laid down some really interesting groundwork with Riri joining this gang and, turning to a life of crime so that she can fund the upgrades to her suit, only for her to realize that she's dug a hole that's way way too deep to get out of, and now she's fearing for her life. For example, going back to one of my favorite elements of the show, which was the kind of intertwining of magic and science, I wish they'd had more time to really expand on that and lead up to that conclusion, which was that Riri needed to incorporate some of that magic if she had any chance of defeating this man with his goddamn red cape. But as it stands, it just felt really, really rushed, and I think the magical elements weren't really given as much bandwidth as the scientific elements on the show. And not to mention, in an ideal world, they would have made this show bigger in terms of scope and also consequences, right? Because the idea that you have this scientific genius incorporating magic, I mean, again, in a fairy tale wonderland, you would have the reintroduction of like Tony Stark or Jarvis or Vision, someone from the Iron Man world coming in, and then also someone from the Doctor Strange world hopping in as well. And so there you have the kind of intertwining of science and magic, really making an impact on the show. Again, this is if the scope was huge, if the budget was limitless. In a fairy tale world, the best version of this would just feel a bit bigger and more substantial. But as it stands, you have a really big idea that's held back by limited episodes, limited budget, and limited scope and importance. Now, one thing that was supposed to make this series feel a little bit grander and more substantial was the introduction to a highly anticipated character in the form of Mephisto. Yes, we finally got the entry of Mephisto officially in the MCU, and he is portrayed by Sacha Baron Cohen in a pretty good casting choice, if I do say so myself. I feel like when it comes to his appearance, when it comes to his mannerisms, okay, I think that they got Mephisto down pat. But unfortunately, the introduction of this character, which should have been a huge gargantuan deal, kind of ended up falling flat, and I think that's for two main reasons. First of all, too little too late. Marvel is too little too late. We were excited to see Mephisto all the way back in 2021 when it was hinted at with all these clues and Easter eggs that maybe he was behind the hex, that maybe he was the one that was controlling Wanda, or maybe Wanda had made this deal with the devil to live this idyllic life in Westview. Now, all of these theories and speculations that we had surrounding the release of WandaVision all circled back to Mephisto, but in the end it had nothing to do with him whatsoever. And we all had egg on our faces, and it was an embarrassing ordeal for everyone all around, for Marvel and Jack Schaefer, for us as fans, because it turned out that all of the theories and all of the, stories that we were coming up with were far more compelling and interesting than what actually ended up happening. The Mephisto storyline would have been perfect in WandaVision, and that's what we were excited to see, but ultimately that didn't happen, and so it left us quite deflated by the end of that show. Now fast forward 4 years, and a lot of people no longer care. A lot has happened since then in the MCU and in the real world, and so we no longer care as much. And so as much as this reveal should have gagged us, it should have been a huge deal, it's kind of fallen flat because it's just come way too late. The first problem is the when, and the second problem is the where, because I'm not sure if Ironheart was the best series to introduce Mephisto in. Of all the characters, to tie the devil to, I'm not sure Ironheart is the one. We could have done it in Moonlight. We could have done it in, I don't know, anything else, Werewolf by Night. But instead they chose to do it in Ironheart, for this to be his big reveal to a character who isn't really tied up in magic that much, like to that extent, I think was a little bit of a letdown. And he doesn't even play a major role in the story itself, so that's a triple letdown. That's a third reason why this doesn't really land, because he's literally just introduced at the end of the penultimate episode. Now, even though on the surface of things it seems like Riri wouldn't really have much to do with Mephisto, by the end of this series they are inextricably linked, because she decided to make a deal with the devil to get back her best friend. And oh sister, my sister, why did you do that again? Like, definitely a terrible decision, a terrible choice, okay? I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying that she made a good decision by making a deal with Mephisto. No. And listen, he might look like Sacha Baron Cohen, you know, on the face of it, and you're like, yeah, he's definitely sketchy, but he's not like horrible. He's not giving Dormammu, like what Stanton drew in her notepad, you know. But if you look a bit closer, and I thought this was a very nice touch, if you look a bit closer at that scene with Mephisto sitting with Riri, you will see that the reflection on his teaspoon shows what his real appearance is like. He is a demon. He's the devil, actually. He is literally Lucifer. And so if she was just paying a little bit more attention and she saw that reflection on the spoon, she would have been Audi 5000, I'm sure. But alas, she decided to make a deal with the devil, and it's just horrible. I hate that for my sister. Again, I do feel like that whole thing was a little bit rushed, because even though we of course know that, you know, Riri loved Natalie down, and she's been so sad and so traumatized by the loss of her friend and her stepfather, that's definitely been an element to the story that's been explored throughout, but we've never really got the sense that Riri would go to that extreme to get her friend back. A trigger for this is of course when she loses access to the AI version of Natalie, which makes sense, but the Riri that we have come to know at this point would sooner put her all into reprogramming Natalie, right? Or trying to restore her, or literally inventing a whole new machine to bring her back, as opposed to making a deal with the devil. So it's kind of weird, kind of bizarre that we ended up with her making that deal. But alas, that's what she did, and like there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do about it. Speaking of sitting with this problem, that's yet another reason why the Mephisto reveal didn't really land as well as it could have. It's because we don't know what's going to happen from here on in. We don't know the follow-up to this. We don't know what the next steps are. We have no idea what Marvel's forward look is looking like. Ever since Endgame, Marvel has been dropping all sorts of storylines, all sorts of ideas and end credit scenes that end up going nowhere. They're literally on a pathway to absolutely nowhere, oftentimes because the project flopped and so they don't want to explore that idea anymore. Even when the project is a success, sometimes you don't get any follow-up from that either. Looking at you, Shang-Chi. So like, I don't know what the plan is following on from this, because this is such a huge cliffhanger to end on for the Ironheart series, but now they've made it explicitly clear that it's a mini series. So how are we going to continue this storyline? Is it going to be through Young Avengers? Is it going to be through, I don't know, like Black Panther 3? Like where are we going with this? And that's the issue that I have as a fan, is that I want to be invested. I want to, you know, sit at the edge of my seat waiting for what's going to happen next. But history tells me, you know, Marvel's current track record tells me that there might never be any follow-up to this, and so it's hard to really be invested, and it's hard to be excited about what comes next for this character or this storyline. Now lastly, I wanted to touch on the villain of the story, and that was of course Parker, aka the Hood. He was portrayed by Anthony Ramos, and this is the part of the story that I thought was just out and out bad. Like I really did not like Parker as a villain. I thought his motives were really weak. I'm sorry. When we got the big reveal that the guy that he was after was his dad, was his rich dad who rejected him at the age of 12, I was like, okay, yeah, that's peak little baby Annie. Like that's really, really peak. Sorry for you. Sorry that happened to you. But like, is that really what all of this is about? Is that all of this is about your daddy issues? Oh, that's I felt so cheated out of a good villain origin story. I think he was weak sauce as a villain, even by Marvel's current standards. And Riri snatched that thing from him. It struck me that a better storyline would have been if he was like really sick. Like if he relied on the cape to literally stay alive, but the thing that was keeping him alive was actually also killing him and corrupting his soul, that would have been so much better of a storyline and a villain origin story for Parker. I had that idea and I was like, man, like that could have been 10 times better. Because then it would have made more sense to kind of explain why he would make a deal with the devil for that cape, because it would give him power and it would would give him good health. But then as time went on, he became corrupted by the cape, right? And he was losing more and more of his soul, even though his corporeal being was thriving. Like, that is so much better of a story. And another thought that I had, say what you want about this series, but it definitely got my creative juices flowing, mostly because I could see the potential of it. And so it really had me bringing up all kinds of different storylines that they could have played with instead. Another thought that I had was that what if he was working for Mephisto and trying to collect souls? Like, he's fighting off his own death. Maybe he has, cancer or a horrible terminal illness. The cape is keeping him alive and making him strong, but the price for that is other people's lives, right? Like, he has to collect bodies for Mephisto to feed on their souls. I don't know if there's any precedent for that in the comics. Like, I'm not going by the comics at all here, clearly, but I feel like that's a much better dynamic. That way he could still seduce his team, into joining him. They still could have gone out and done their Robin Hooding, but on the down low, he's really out here burying folks, right? Like, they think they're being, these heroes stealing from the rich, giving to the poor. But on the DL, you have the hood just kind of shoot, bang, bang, all of these CEOs, not for some moral, righteous purpose, but rather because he's collecting souls for Mephisto to feed on. Ooh, that would have been, honestly, I think I cooked to this. Oh, it's such a shame they didn't have me in the writer's room. Kevin Feige, call me up. Now, speaking of character motives, I would say this wasn't just a weakness for the villain, but also for the hero. I don't think Riri's motives for, first of all, creating an Iron Man suit, and second of all, being a hero in it, was strong enough. Addressing the first point, I don't think there is a strong enough link between Riri and Iron Man in this series. If you consider the other kind of legacy characters that we've gotten recently in the MCU, right? Like, you have Kamala Khan, who's Ms. Marvel, you have Kate Bishop, who's Hawkeye, and you have Yelena, who's the new Black Widow. Each of these characters was shown to have a really close tie and connection to their faves, to those that came before them. Yelena is literally Natasha's sister, so it makes sense that she'll take on that mantle, and she's willing to step up to the plate by the end of Thunderbolts. And then you have Kate, who literally witnessed Hawkeye's heroicism during the Battle of New York. She grew up with that memory and, was inspired by him to take up archery and become a hero herself. And then you have Kamala, who similarly was inspired by Captain Marvel, and so when she gets powers, that's who she wants to embody as well. Those are solid foundations for that kind of aspirational heroicism, but that's lacking in Riri. You don't really get the sense that she admired Tony Stark any more than she did like Steve Jobs. Like, in fact, she constantly talks about being better than them, and the only disadvantage that she has is that she doesn't have the same amount of resources that they did. And whilst that's completely true and very relatable, especially as she is a young Black female character who doesn't come from a lot of means, definitely doesn't help explain why she would want to create an Iron Man suit in particular. Like, what is the tie-in there? Did Tony Stark save her family? Like, what's the reason why she wanted to embody Iron Man specifically, of all of the heroes that exist in the MCU? There's no real logic to that that's shown through this series. The series doesn't really answer that question, and so she ends up being an Iron Man tribute in name only. But then we get to the second part about why Riri wanted to be a hero, regardless of how her suit looks and what it was inspired by. And again, those motives are pretty weak, as they have been in many of the Marvel projects recently. The exploration of heroicism and why our protagonists want to step up and become heroes hasn't really been clear in a lot of the Disney Plus series. Oftentimes they're running away from something or trying to take something down, but you don't really get the sense that there's this like moral obligation for them to do good. And that lacking in the Disney Plus shows stands out even more when you compare it to the Thunderbolts movie, which really honed in on this. Like, that story was all about these heroes trying to rise up from their flawed pasts in order to do good, in order to be better than what they used to be. So when you compare these two projects, especially as they came out back to back, you really see how lacking that is in Ironheart's hero's journey. And so with all of that being said, guys, I'm going to be giving Ironheart a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Ironheart, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch you videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.